The war in Ukraine is being fought on the ground, in the air, and also where people get their news and information. Russia's weapon of choice there, a constant stream of disinformation.
Social media is full of these images and stories. They can spread in an instant. If they find an audience, they can create confusion, fear, or confirm extreme opinions. Many of them start here, in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, at what's known as the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, also known as the Troll Factory. It's owned by Wagner paramilitary group financier Evgeny Prigozhin, seen here allegedly at the front in Ukraine as his private army shoots at Ukrainian positions. The IRA is just one agency that works along with Russia's FSB intelligence service. Also creating content are patriotic volunteers, while others, trolls and bots, spread the word on social media. The messages are intended to hit different targets, or sometimes multiple targets.
For example, they want to influence their own population to increase support of so-called special military operation, to influence people to go to the army. And of course, they try to influence Western communities, Western countries, population of Western countries to weaken our support.
Let's look at some examples of fake messages that found audiences. This image of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky giving away parts of Ukraine to Poland in exchange for tanks, based on no real reporting, but playing on ancient fears of Ukraine's being divided yet again. Or this message for a Russian audience, stating that the US intends to launch 5,000 Tomahawk missiles at Russia in a surprise strike, supposedly sourced from the New York Times, though no record of any such article exists on the New York Times website. Or this, alleging that President Zelensky has squirreled away a fortune, fueling long-standing stereotypes about Ukrainian leaders' corruption. This one feeds the narrative in far-right and far-left circles in the US and Europe that sending money to Ukraine is wasteful and useless, only enriching the leadership there. What makes these messages effective?
I think if I would have to choose one word that describes it, it will be subtlety. So basically, a really good piece of information is predominantly using actual facts and is either twisting them or adding something on top, or is falsifying just a bit of it. So from the first, read, from the first glance, it might seem real, and then you sort of get dragged in because if someone puts out something obscene, you can just clearly see that it's nonsense, and you just look away. But when it's subtle, when there's a variety of different actors involved, when it seems that there are a lot of different voices voicing this out, especially online on social media, if we see that there's a lot of commenting going on under a specific piece or a news media article, this could be highly effective because it just seems real.
It just seems real, and it is real to many people. Though it's impossible to measure how many people's minds are changed by disinformation, it's clear that Russia places a high value on it, and that the barrage of fake and twisted stories is not likely to let up soon.
Well, the day is almost done. The conversation continues online. We will see you right here tomorrow. Have a good one.
A web of lies. Who is profiting from fake news about renewable energies? Hope below the sand. Why fortune seekers are heading to the Mauritanian desert. And the doctors of the Incas. How Bolivia's traditional healers are seeking their place in the modern world. Just under 200 years ago, French physicist and mathematician Joseph Fourier discovered the greenhouse effect. When sunlight shines into a closed glass box, the box heats up because the energy can't escape. No one knew then that this also applied to our planet, nor did anyone know that that was because of the huge amounts of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere by burning oil, gas, and coal. Things are different today, of course. For decades, we've known why our climate is changing. But doubts have been sown about it for just as long, as well as about what needs to be done to stop it.
Memes, streams, feeds, shopping, communication. All the information in the world ready when you need it. The internet is a magical place, but there are also some weird corners. I'm talking about the dark underbelly, the ugly face of conspiracy theories and misinformation that shows itself in obscure forums and chat groups, especially under stories about renewables. We read the thousands of comments posted under our videos on wind and solar and collected those that smelled of misinformation. And slowly, patterns emerged. The same talking points kept coming up, and as futile as it may be, we decided to debunk them. People kept pointing out that making wind turbines and solar panels creates emissions because it needs energy.
All these materials have to be mined, refined, and/or manufactured in order to make solar panels.
Requires massive amounts of conventional energy.
And yes, that actually applies to every form of energy generation. But some spelled out what others just insinuated, that renewables are worse for the climate than fossil fuels.
The fumes coming up to make these massive windmills is more than anything that we're talking about with natural gas.
No. For wind and solar, I think for wind you are now at 20 grams per kilowatt hour that you emit, and for solar I think on average is now like 40 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and that's a fraction like 1/10 or 1/20 of what you get with fossil fuels.
Of course wind and solar have a carbon footprint, but it's tremendously lower than that of any fossil fuel. Oh, and this next rumor, by the way, is also not true.
A wind farm spends the first 7-8 years of its life earning back the energy that went into building the wind turbine.
It's such nonsense. It's such utter nonsense. I mean, for windmills, it takes like half a year nowadays for the windmill to produce as much energy as it took for the whole thing to be produced and put in place.
So with this one out of the way, on to the next one. A classic on the renewables bashing hit list.
The essential unreliability of solar and wind.
Solar and wind are unreliable fuels.
We cannot rely on renewables alone.
The message here is that solar and wind will plunge us into chaos.
This isn't exactly a newsflash, but the sun doesn't shine all the time. And the wind doesn't blow all the time.
And those peddling this myth got very excited in early 2021.
Record snowfall in parts of Texas.
Deadly winter storm blanketed most of that state with snow and ice.
Winter storms swept across the US state of Texas, leading to severe power outages that killed hundreds of people. And the anti-renewables propaganda machine immediately found a culprit.
The windmills froze, so the power grid failed.
Even the state's governor, who's received millions of dollars in campaign funding from the oil and gas industry, blamed renewables.
Our wind and our solar got shut down, and that thrust Texas into a situation where it was lacking power. It just shows that fossil fuel is necessary for the state of Texas.
This picture started spreading online, and along with it, the narrative that frozen wind turbines caused the blackout. But they didn't. The photo was actually taken in Sweden and first published in 2015, and frozen wind turbines were really not the biggest problem in Texas.
The nuclear went down, coal went down, natural gas went down, and a portion of the wind turbines went down simultaneously.
A report by the University of Texas, which came out in the catastrophe's aftermath, showed what the biggest problem was. Outages in fossil fuel power plants, especially those running on natural gas. Yes, some wind turbines also stopped working, but that could have been prevented.
There are wind turbines in many states in the US and in Northern Europe that don't freeze because they actually have de-icing equipment on them. So the problem was not intrinsically with the wind turbines, but the fact that there was no de-icing equipment.
What happened in Texas was not the fault of renewables. But that's exactly what countless people were told and believed.
The online world is like a kind of cooking pot. There are things that have been in that cooking pot for quite a long while. There are new ingredients being added in. Every time it gets added in, it gets stirred up.
This is Neil Johnson, who researches online misinformation.
At any one time, in any place in this network, can appear any kind of combination of pre-existing ideas, which will never go away. You can't eradicate them.
Our brain plays its part in this as well. It favors information we get from people we trust or admire, and information that supports our worldview. Change can be intimidating. And it's also not always easy to separate fact from fake. Much of the misinformation out there does contain a grain of truth that then gets blown out of proportion. Yes, solar panels do have a carbon footprint, but it's tiny compared to that of fossil fuels. Yes, some wind turbines did freeze in Texas, but that wasn't the main reason for the blackout by a long shot. Context matters, also for this die-hard myth about wind turbines.
They're terrible for birds.
Kills all the birds.
Again, it's true that wind turbines kill some birds, but cars kill significantly more. And so do skyscrapers, and even cats. Debunking is a hard and thankless job. The list of falsehood about renewables circulating online is pretty much endless. We could keep telling you what's wrong with them, one by one, forever. And I guess that's what the people behind them want us to do. They want to keep us busy and distracted from asking way more interesting questions. Like, who's peddling these myths in the first place?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint it. I think it's a lot of think tanks, right-leaning think tanks.
They get most of their funding through donations and grants. And wouldn't it just be interesting to know from whom?
Usually the most interesting think tanks don't mention where they get their money from. So it's basically a lot of guesswork.
Sometimes we do get the odd glimpse into their finances. In the past, many of them received money from ExxonMobil, according to the fossil fuel giant's donation reports. But usually most of this plays out behind closed doors. The think tanks operate as non-profit charities, which allows them to keep secret who their sugar daddies are. Quite frankly, it's been frustrating and disheartening to see all these outlandish claims about wind and solar still out there. I guess it's important to take them for what they are: a symptom. A symptom of a trillion-dollar industry clinging onto its business model. Doubts about the alternatives and fear of change are helping it keep its grip.
Gold is the stuff of dreams and desires. In the late 19th century, more than 100,000 people flocked to Alaska's Klondike River to try and find it. This is probably the most famous gold rush in history, but there have been many more. Poverty was the big driving force behind the desire to find gold in often inhospitable regions. It still is. In Mauritania, in North Africa, people come from many countries in the hope of making their fortune.
Dreams are said to come true in the scorching heat of the Sahara in northern Mauritania. But anyone looking to fulfill their dreams here has to dig deep. They also need to be brave or extremely desperate. The Mauritanian government has opened up the area for gold prospecting. Those seeking their fortune descend deep into the sand in search of buried treasure, but it's a risky undertaking.
There are many dangers here. You could be working when suddenly everything collapses and the sand falls on you. We'll look for you and remove the sand until we find you. But there's no oxygen when you're trapped in the pit. There are a lot of cracks in the rock, so it's really dangerous from a safety point of view. The rocks in this part of the Sahara are not very stable. The gold diggers try to locate the vein and follow it into the depths. Sometimes it's slanted, sometimes vertical, depending on how jagged the rock is. That's the surface. Assuming there are veins here, the miners will try to find the part of the vein closest to the surface. They'd start digging here, for example. But those who start their hole here, for example, will have to dig a lot further to reach the vein. So it all depends on the depth of the strand.
More than 40,000 people from Mauritania and neighboring countries have flocked to the desert. Many want to escape poverty and unemployment. They hope to find something in the sand that could give them a shot at a better life.
I studied telecommunications at university for 2 years, but it didn't work out. It's very difficult to find a job here, to live here. So you choose a path and walk it until you find something. I tried to go abroad to further my studies. I applied for visas for Spain, Germany, and Canada, but the applications were all rejected. Getting a visa is harder than finding gold.
The prospect of a big find has attracted many people from the region. 18-year-old Mohammed has already made his way through a number of countries since leaving Sudan in 2019.
I worked in Niger, then Chad, then I went to Libya, Tunis, Tamanrasset in Algeria, and finally here to Mauritania, always through the desert.
For Mohammed and other men who come here to work, the journey to Mauritania was not easy.
There's a mafia along the way. In Mali, for example, there are jihadists who come out of the bush and attack you. They have guns, and they're ruthless. They take everything you have, and if you try to fight back, you'll be killed. We encountered many problems on the road.
Security is just one of many problems for the men in the desert. After the rock has been washed out, it's treated with mercury in order to extract the gold. The process is highly toxic for people and the environment. The sea and Bank Dargan National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is less than 30 kilometers away.
In 2021, a mercury level of 0.5 milligrams per kilo was measured here, 100 times more mercury than about 10 years ago. It goes from animal to animal, it's converted. At the end of the chain in humans, it becomes methylmercury, which is extremely toxic. These are very high environmental costs. Has this phenomenon been adequately studied? Are we giving the issues enough consideration? Are we asking the right questions?
The gold miners are not concerned with these questions. The environment is not a priority compared to their own survival and the dream of having their own little piece of the pie.
We found the stones here, not very far down. I love watching documentaries. I used to watch Netflix. Do you know the Netflix app? I see people there who want to do something, and they just do it. I watched a documentary about the first person from his country to climb Mount Everest. I hope one day to do the same.
The World Health Organization estimates that around 80% of the world's population regularly uses traditional medicines. These include active ingredients from nature in tablets, teas and ointments, as well as acupuncture, yoga, Ayurveda and spiritual therapies. Traditional healers still play a key role in many societies. That's often because modern medicine is either difficult to access or simply unaffordable.
For centuries, legendary medicine men, the Kayawaya, lived close to Lake Titicaca. They were the doctors of the Inca kings, often called witches of the Andes. What remains of this culture today? We met Aurelio Ortiz, who calls himself one of the last Kayawaya.
También puede tener su propiedad curativa en los raíces.
We Kayawaya know the medicinal properties of roots, flowers, leaves, and fruits.
Así es que es un amplio conocimiento minucioso.
I received my extensive knowledge about plants from my grandparents. Look at this moss.